Chapter 1: The Wrong Kind of Silence. The silence was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the immediate, ringing deafness after the boom, the sound that had punched the air out of my lungs and sent every bird for 50 miles screaming into the sky. No, this was the silence after. The kind that settled deep in your bones, thick and heavy like wet wool. Mount Chiron Wildlife Sanctuary wasn't meant to be silent. It was supposed to be a riot of noise. The chatter of rescued macaws, the distant howl of the wolf pack we were reintroducing, the rustle of deer in the underbrush, even the groan of the generators powering the main lodge and the research labs. Now, nothing. Just the faint hiss of wind through the shattered pines near the impact zone and the frantic thump of my own heart against my ribs. It had been 3 days since the sky fell. That's what Ben Carter, our resident maintenance guy and nervous wreck, called it. Not a meteorite, not an asteroid. Sky falling, Jax. Simple as that. Simple wasn't the word I'd use. Catastrophic, maybe. World-altering, definitely. The object, whatever it was, hadn't just hit. It had punched through the granite peak on the north ridge, carving a crater easily half a mile wide and God knows how deep. The blast wave had flattened trees like matchsticks, shattered every window in the sanctuary complex, and knocked out all our long-range comms. Sat phone, radio tower, even the backup ham rig Ben kept tinkering with dead as the Precambrian rocket landed on. We were cut off, high on a mountain, surrounded by acres of wilderness that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. There were 5 of us left huddled in the main lodge's reinforced emergency bunker, originally designed for forest fire safety, now our de facto prison. There was me, Jax Teller, head ranger. 30 years climbing these mountains, tracking game, putting out fires, and occasionally dealing with idiot tourists who thought bears were cuddly. My job was simple: keep the animals safe, keep the people safe. Right now, I was failing spectacularly on both counts. Dr. Kalen Morrow, the head biologist, tall, lean, with eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He'd always been intense, obsessed with the unique ecosystem up here, the isolation breeding strange adaptations even before the sky fell. Now, his intensity had curdled into something else. A morbid fascination. While the rest of us were reeling, checking supplies, trying to figure out how badly screwed we were, Mora was observing. Taking notes in a little waterproof binder, his gaze lingering on the warped landscape outside the bunker's reinforced viewport with something unsettlingly close to satisfaction. He saw the mutation starting almost immediately, subtle things at first, an unnatural sheen on a surviving raven's feathers, the way a squirrel moved with a jerky, too precise gait. He called it environmental adaptive pressure on an unprecedented scale. I called it creepy as hell. Maya Flores, the vet tech, young, maybe mid-20s, with a heart bigger than this whole damn mountain. She loved these animals. Every rescued hawk with a broken wing, every orphaned fawn, she knew them, named them, fretted over them. The impact, the destruction, the silence. It hit her hard. She spent most of the first day crying, the second staring blankly, and now on the third she just seemed numb, lost in a way that worried me more than the tears. She kept murmuring the names of animals we knew had pens near the impact site. Thunder. Where's Thunder? He hated loud noises. Thunder was a geriatric mountain lion with arthritis. He wasn't anywhere good now. Ben Carter, our maintenance guru, short, perpetually sweating even in the chill mountain air. Ben knew every wire, every pipe, every generator quirk in this place. If it hummed, hissed, or carried voltage, Ben understood it. Usually his anxiety was a low-frequency hum. Now it was a crackling, high-tension wire ready to snap. He kept checking the backup generator fueling the bunker lights, fiddling with the dead radio, muttering about imps and strange frequencies the rock might be emitting. "It ain't natural, Jax," he'd whisper, wiping sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. "That rock, it's singing the wrong song." And then there was Commander Eva Rostova. She was the wild card. Ex-military, brought in by the board just 6 months ago as a risk assessment and security consultant, after a minor poaching incident spooked the donors. Sharp, dressed in practical tack gear even before the impact, Rostova operated on a different frequency than the rest of us sanctuary folks. She saw threats, vectors, containment protocols. The meteorite wasn't a geological event to her. It was a breach. Her immediate priority was establishing contact, assessing external threats, as if the giant smoking hole wasn't enough, and imposing order. The fact that all comms were dead and her authority now extended only to the 4 walls of this bunker infuriated her. She paced like a caged wolf, occasionally snapping orders at Ben about the radio or demanding Morrow give her data he didn't have. She didn't trust the mountain. She didn't trust Morrow's fascination, and I got the feeling she didn't trust me either. The first real sign that things were worse than just isolation and dead animals came late on the 3rd day. The wind had picked up, carrying a strange, metallic scent from the crater, ozone, and something else, something organic and wrong, like spoiled meat left in the sun. Ben had the generator humming okay, keeping the emergency lights flickering, but the silence outside pressed in. "I need to check the perimeter fence," I said, grabbing my heavy maglite and the bolt-action rifle I kept oiled and ready. "See if anything's moving." "Negative, tell her," Rostova snapped immediately. Her hand instinctively went to the holstered pistol on her hip. Unknown environmental hazards, possible residual atmospheric contaminants near the impact zone. Standard protocol is secure in place until external assessment. Standard protocol went out the window when half the mountain vaporized, Commander, I retorted, keeping my voice level. We need to know what's out there. If the fence is down, anything could wander in or out. The thought of whatever Mara was seeing, those subtle mutations getting loose, that was a cold dread I didn't want to entertain. Mara looked up from his notes, a faint, almost pitying smile on his lips. "Jax has a point, Eva. Empirical observation is necessary. The fauna will be adapting. Understanding their current behavioral patterns could be crucial for our survival." Rostova glared at him, then at me. "Fine, 50 meters, visual inspection only. Maintain radio contact." She tapped the short-range radio clip to her vest. Ben had managed to get 2 working, line of sight only. Weak, but better than shouting. "Ben, you check the west side viewport. Maya, keep an eye on the east. Shout if you see anything bigger than a rabbit," I instructed. Maya nodded mutely. Ben just swallowed hard and scurried to the thick plexiglass window. I cycled the bunker's heavy steel door, the hydraulics hissing in the unnatural quiet. The cold air hit me, sharp and tasting of ozone and that rotten tang. I flicked on the maglite, its beam cutting a swathe through the twilight. The destruction was surreal. Twisted metal that used to be animal enclosures, splintered trees, patches of ground fused into glassy black patches. But it was the stillness that got me. No insects chirping, no rustling in the leaf litter. Just the wind and my own breathing, loud in my ears. I moved cautiously towards the section of perimeter fence nearest the lodge. It was 10-foot chain link topped with barbed wire, designed to keep bears out and the reintroduced wolves in, or it had been. Now a section 50 yards long was flattened, peeled back like a sardine can lid, the metal posts bent at impossible angles. Not cut, not crashed into, bent, like a giant had casually swatted it aside. "Jax," Rostova's voice crackled over the radio, making me jump. "Report." "Fence is down," I said, keeping my voice low. "Looks torn open, something big." "Define big." "Big enough to not care about 10 feet of steel fence." I swept the light back and forth. Nothing, just wreckage and shadows, but I felt it. That primal instinct, the one that screams predator nearby. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Then I saw the tracks. Near the mangled fence line, in a patch of damp earth spared the worst of the blast heat. They were canine, definitely. Wolf prints, but wrong, too big for starters. Bigger than any wolf I'd ever tracked, bigger even than the alpha male of our pack, Kazan. The stride was too long, the claws digging deeper than they should, suggesting immense weight. And the pattern. They weren't moving like a normal wolf, exploring or patrolling. They were moving in a formation. 3 sets of prints converging on the breach, then fanning out slightly inside the perimeter, moving with purpose. Calculated. "Commander," I whispered into the radio, "we've got wolf tracks. Our pack maybe, but they're big, really big, and moving coordinated." Static hissed for a moment. "Acknowledged. Assessed trajectory. Are they moving towards the lodge?" I knelt, tracing the path. They seemed to be heading towards the dense woods bordering the service road, away from the lodge for now. Negative, moving towards the south woods. "But Commander, this isn't normal predatory behavior. This is organized." Before she could respond, a sound cut through the wind. High-pitched chattering coming from the skeletal remains of a massive oak tree nearby. I snapped the light up. Perched on a blackened limb were maybe a dozen ravens, or things that used to be ravens. Their feathers had that oily, unnatural sheen Morrow had mentioned, shimmering faintly even in the twilight. Their eyes seemed too large, reflecting the beam with a dead, unsettling yellow light. And they weren't cawing. They were making a sound like clicking rocks. A rapid, rhythmic clatter that grated on the nerves. Then one of them tilted its head, fixed its yellow eyes directly on me, and spoke. Not a squawk, not a mimic. A voice. Dry, rustling like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Tell her," it rasped, my name clear as day. My blood went cold. I stumbled back, rifle coming up instinctively. The beam caught the bird, its head cocked, watching me. "Jax, tell her," another one echoed, the sound slightly different, higher pitched. "He sees," a third one clicked, the voice unnerving, multi-toned, like several voices layered over each other. "He knows," chirped another. "The fence is down," one rasped. perfectly mimicking my own words into the radio just moments before. I scrambled back towards the bunker door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Rostova, pulling back, the birds. They're talking, they're mimicking me. Mimicking, a chorus of dry voices echoed from the tree, followed by a sound that was horribly, unmistakably laughter. Cold, clicking, utterly inhuman laughter. "Get inside, tell her." Rostova's voice was tight with controlled panic. I slammed the heavy door shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for breath. Ben and Maya stared at me, faces pale. Mara was at the viewport, peering out intently, a look of almost ecstatic discovery on his face. Rostova had her pistol drawn, aimed squarely at the door as if expecting the birds to peck their way through solid steel. "What the hell was that?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling. They knew my name," I stammered, trying to get my breathing under control. "They repeated what I said into the radio." Morrow turned from the window, his eyes gleaming. "Fascinating. Accelerated vocal mimicry, possibly triggered by complex auditory input and the mutagenic properties of the impactor's radiation. The potential for interspecies communication, Jax, think of it." "Think of it," I rounded on him, anger momentarily overriding fear. "They're not communicating, Morrow, they're mocking us. They're listening, those wolf tracks, that fence. This isn't random mutation. Something is happening to them, something smart, and it's watching us." Rostova lowered her weapon slightly, her face grim. "He's right, Doctor. This changes the threat assessment significantly. We're not just dealing with panicked animals." Outside, the clicking laughter of the ravens had stopped. Replacing it was a new sound, carried on the wind from the darkening woods to the south. A sound that made the short hairs on my arms stand up straight. A low, resonant howl, deep-chested, powerful, unmistakably wolf. But layered within it, beneath the familiar lupin call, was something else. A thrumming, guttural intelligence. A note of cold, calculating patience. It wasn't the sound of a wild animal calling to its pack. It was the sound of a general summoning his troops. The wrong kind of silence had been broken, and what replaced it was infinitely worse. Ben started muttering prayers under his breath. Maya hugged herself, rocking slightly. Mora watched the viewport, utterly captivated. Rostova checked the magazine on her pistol with a sharp, metallic click. And I knew, deep in my gut, that the sanctuary was no longer ours. We weren't the caretakers anymore. We were the exhibits, and the new management was hungry. Chapter 2: Voices on the Wire. The next 48 hours bled together in a haze of fear, flickering emergency lights, and the constant, gnawing tension of being watched. We rationed the emergency supplies, protein bars that tasted like chalk, canned water, freeze-dried meals that resembled astronaut food rejected for being too depressing. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by Ben's nervous fidgeting, Rostova's quiet but constant readiness checks, and the sounds from outside. The silence never truly returned. It was replaced by whispers on the wind, clicks and chatters from unseen things in the ruined trees, and most terrifyingly, the howling. It wasn't constant but strategic. Sometimes distant, sometimes chillingly close, always carrying that undercurrent of cold intelligence. "Pack Alpha," I started calling the source in my head. It felt right. This wasn't just an animal, it was a commander. The birds were the worst, though. The choir, Maya called them, her voice hollow. They didn't just mimic anymore. They'd learned. They perched on the roof of the lodge just outside the bunker's range of vision and talked. Not just words, but voices. They'd mimic Ben's worried muttering, Restova's clipped commands, even Maya's soft weeping. Sometimes they'd string sounds together into horrifying collages. A snatch of my voice reporting the fence damage, followed by that dry, clicking laughter. Then a perfect imitation of a deer's panicked bleat cut short by a wet, tearing sound. Psychological warfare, feathered edition. Morrow, damn him, was thriving. He treated the whole situation like the world's most exciting, albeit lethal, research project. He'd stand at the viewport for hours, scribbling furiously in his notebook, occasionally asking unnerving questions. Jax, did the wolves display coordinated hunting patterns before the event? Pack Alpha's flanking maneuvers seem remarkably sophisticated. Or, Maya, you mentioned the corvids had distinct dialects based on nesting zones. Does the choir exhibit a blend, suggesting forced integration, or perhaps directed learning? His detachment was a cold counterpoint to the rising panic. He seemed less concerned with survival and more with documenting the dawn of a new, terrifying era. Rostova, meanwhile, was all coiled energy and frustration. Her military mind chafed against the inability to act decisively. "We're static targets," she grated, packing the confined space. "Every hour we sit here, they learn more, adapt more. We need to regain mobility, establish a fallback point, secure heavy weaponry if any survived in the ranger station armory." Her chance, or what she thought was her chance, came on the fifth day. Ben, during one of his obsessive checks, thought he picked up a faint signal fragment on the ham radio, a burst of static that sounded almost like a distorted voice. "Could be atmospheric," he admitted, fiddling with the knobs, sweat beading on his forehead. Or it could be the rock messing with things again. But maybe, just maybe, if we could get to the main radio tower relay on Sentinel Peak. Sentinel Peak was half a mile hike uphill through dense, now potentially hostile woods. The tower itself was likely damaged, but its height offered the best chance of bypassing whatever interference the meteorite was generating. Rostova seized on it. Viable objective. Minimal exposure route if we stick to the old maintenance trail. Tell her, you know the path. Morrow, you stay with Flores and Carter, maintain bunker security. Morrow objected mildly. The opportunity for observing Pack Alpha's territorial defense protocols firsthand is outweighed by the need for someone to possibly call for evac. Doctor, Rostova cut him off sharply. "You're a biologist, not infantry. Tell her, gear up. 15 minutes. Reluctantly, I agreed. Staying put felt like waiting to die, but heading out felt like walking into the lion's den, or the wolf's in this case. I checked my rifle, loaded extra magazines, grabbed the other working short-range radio. Maya pressed a small first-aid kit into my hand. "Be careful, Jax," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Don't listen to the birds." The hike was nerve-wracking. The woods were eerily quiet again, but it wasn't the dead silence of the first days. It was a watchful silence. Every shadow seemed too deep. Every rustle of wind in the mutated leaves sounded like stealthy movement. Rostova moved with practiced efficiency, scanning constantly, her pistol held at a low ready. I focused on the trail, noting broken twigs, patches of disturbed earth, anything out of place. We found signs. More of the oversized wolf tracks confirming Pack Alpha's pack was active in this area. A deer carcass stripped clean with almost surgical precision, bones neatly piled. That wasn't normal wolf behavior. That was meticulous, disturbing. Halfway up, the choir started. Faintly at first, distant clicks and chatters, then closer. They weren't mimicking us this time. They were making sounds like static, radio static, short bursts cutting in and out, mimicking the very signal Ben thought he'd heard. "They know," Rostova muttered, her jaw tight. "They know what we're doing." "Or someone told them," I said, glancing back down the mountain towards the lodge, towards Morrow. The thought felt disloyal, paranoid, but it wouldn't leave. How else could they know? We pushed on, the static mimicking calls growing louder, circling us. It felt like they were hurting us. Then, rounding a bend choked with strangely vibrant, unhealthy-looking ferns, we saw the tower, or what was left of it. The base structure was intact, but the top third, antenna array and all, was mangled, twisted metal pointing accusingly at the sky. Below it, packing restlessly, were 3 wolves. They were huge, easily 200 pounds each, thick-muscled, their fur patchy in places, revealing skin that seemed unnaturally tough, almost scaled. Their eyes glowed with a faint, internal yellow light mirroring the birds. They saw us instantly, heads snapping up, low growls rumbling in their chests. They didn't charge. They spread out, flanking, cutting off any retreat down the main trail. Intelligent, tactical. "Pack Alpha's lieutenants," I breathed, raising my rifle. "Hold fire," Rostova commanded, her voice steady despite the situation. "Conserve ammo, let's see what they want." What they wanted, apparently, was for us to stay put. They just watched us, blocking the path, their unnerving intelligence palpable. Then, from the dense woods to our left, a deeper growl echoed. A shadow detached itself from the trees. Pack Alpha. He was immense, easily dwarfing the other 3. His fur was darker, almost black, sleek despite the mutations. His head was massive, the skull subtly distorted, the brow ridge pronounced, giving him a disturbingly simian intelligence in his gaze. His eyes weren't just yellow. They seemed to pulse with a faint, internal luminescence, casting eerie shadows. He didn't look at us with animalistic aggression, but with cold assessment, like a general surveying intruders on his battlefield. Behind him, slinking low, was another figure, smaller, hunched. My blood ran cold as I recognized the tattered remains of a sanctuary jacket. It was Miller, one of the junior researchers who'd been missing since the impact, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, stretched taut over sharp bones. Patches of strange, pale fungus bloomed on his face and hands. His eyes were wide, vacant, pupils dilated. He wasn't moving on his own. He seemed tethered to Pack Alpha by some invisible leash, shambling forward only when the wolf nudged him with its massive head. He carried something, a small, metallic object clutched in his fungal fingers. "Miller," Rostova whispered, horrified. Pack Alpha let out a low whine, nudging Miller forward. The man-thing stumbled, holding out the object. It was one of Ben's diagnostic tools, a frequency scanner he'd been using to try and pinpoint the source of the radio interference. "He wants us to have it?" I asked, bewildered. Morrow's voice suddenly crackled over my radio, startlingly clear despite the distance and interference that should have made it impossible. "Observe, Jax. Don't interfere. This is unprecedented. Cross-species communication. Tool presentation." How the hell was his signal so strong? Pac Alpha ignored Morrow's disembodied voice. He fixed his intelligent eyes on Rostova, then nudged Miller again. Miller fumbled with the scanner, his fungal fingers clumsy, and dropped it at Rostova's feet. Then he shuffled back, melting into the shadows beside his master. Rostova cautiously picked up the scanner. It flickered to life in her hand. The screen displayed a chaotic jumble of frequencies, but one spiked erratically, centered around the exact frequency Ben had detected earlier. It wasn't a signal fragment. It was a localized jammer signal. Focused, powerful, and originating from. I checked the directional reading. It pointed directly back towards the lodge, towards the bunker. Someone wasn't just hopping the radio stayed dead. Someone was making sure it stayed dead. At that moment, as the horrifying implications sank in, the choir exploded overhead. Not with static this time, but with Rostova's voice perfectly mimicked. "Fall back. Ambush. Tell her, cover me." Instinctively, I spun, expecting an attack from behind. There was nothing. It was a phantom command. And in that split second of distraction, Pac Alpha attacked. Not us, the tower. With a surge of impossible speed and power, he slammed his massive body into the weakened base of the radio tower. Metal groaned, buckled. The other wolves joined in, tearing at support struts with unnatural strength. It wasn't random destruction. They were systematically dismantling the last hope of communication. "They were waiting," Rostova shouted, finally opening fire with her pistol. The shots cracked loud in the enclosed space, but the wolves barely flinched, their mutated hides seemingly absorbing the impact. One yelped as a bullet perhaps found a softer spot, but it didn't stop its demolition work. I fired the rifle, aiming for Pac Alpha's head. The bullet ricocheted off his distorted skull with a sickening ping. He turned his head, those luminous eyes fixing on me, and let out a growl that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't pain or anger. It was annoyance, like swatting a fly. The tower shrieked, leaning precariously. "We have to go now," I yelled, grabbing Rostova's arm. We retreated, firing sporadically to keep the wolves occupied. They didn't pursue immediately. They finished their work. With a final, groaning, tearing sound, the radio tower collapsed sideways, crashing through the mutated trees. Silence fell, broken only by our ragged breathing and the triumphant, echoing howl of Pac Alpha. The hike back down was a grim, silent affair. The choir shadowed us, occasionally mimicking Rostova's phantom fallback order, followed by their dry, clicking laughter, taunting us. We stumbled back into the bunker, covered in grime and sweat. The image of the deliberately destroyed tower burned into our minds. Maya rushed forward, relief flooding her face, then faltering as she saw our expressions. Ben looked up from the dead ham radio, his face pale. Mara was waiting, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes gleaming. Report. Rostova threw the damaged frequency scanner onto the table. Report. The tower is destroyed. Pack Alpha is coordinating them with tactical precision. And Miller. God, Morrow, what happened to Miller? Morrow picked up the scanner, examining it with intense interest. Fascinating fungal symbiosis, it appears. The meteorite likely carried extremophile spores. Miller must have succumbed near the impact zone. Tragic, but biologically remarkable. Remarkable. I slammed my hand on the table, making him jump. That jammer signal, Morrow, it came from here. Someone in this bunker deliberately led us into a trap and ensured we couldn't call for help. Ben gasped, shrinking back. Maya looked horrified. Rostova's eyes narrowed, flicking between me and Morrow. Morrow raised an eyebrow, his calm infuriating. An extraordinary accusation, Jax, based on a damaged scanner retrieved under duress from, well, let's just say an unreliable source. Perhaps the meteorite itself generates complex phantom signals. Or perhaps, he added, his voice dropping slightly, Commander Rostova's military background makes her prioritize silencing communications to prevent our condition from alarming the outside world. Rostova stiffened, her hand dropping to her sidearm. Are you accusing me, Doctor? Merely exploring possibilities, Morrow said smoothly. In such a high-stress environment, paranoia is. This isn't paranoia. I cut him off, my voice shaking with anger and certainty. The birds repeating my words. The jammer signal. The wolves waiting for us. Someone is helping them. Someone is talking to them. Someone in this room. The air crackled with tension. Ben looked like he was about to faint. Maya stared at Morrow, a flicker of doubt, maybe even fear, crossing her features for the first time. Rostova's gaze was like ice, fixed on the biologist. Morrow simply picked up his notebook. Hypothetically, he murmured, almost to himself, if one were facilitating communication, what would the animals be trying to say? Outside, from the direction of the ruined tower, a single, clear voice echoed, perfectly mimicking Ben Carter's nervous tremor. It ain't natural, Jax. It's singing the wrong song. Followed by the cold, clicking laughter of the choir. The enemy wasn't just outside the door anymore. It was locked in here with us. Chapter 3: Circuits and Claws. The accusation hung heavy in the recycled air of the bunker, thick and poisonous. Nobody trusted anyone. Every flicker of the emergency light seemed sinister, every distant howl a potential signal, every shared glance loaded with suspicion. We were 5 people crammed into a steel box, surrounded by mutated horrors, and one of us was a traitor. Sleep became impossible. We took shifts watching each other as much as watching the viewport. Morrow maintained his unnerving calm, burying himself in his notes, occasionally offering cryptic observations about the emergent intelligence outside. Rostova became even more rigid, her distrust a palpable force field. She stripped and cleaned her pistol twice a day, her movements precise and economical. She watched Morrow constantly, but her gaze sometimes flickered towards me too. Did she believe him? Did she think my ranger's pragmatism hid something darker? Maya retreated further into herself, her empathy warring with the horrifying reality. She avoided Morrow pointedly now, her earlier scientific curiosity replaced by a quiet dread. Ben Carter was visibly deteriorating. He jumped at every sound, his hands trembled, and he barely ate. He kept tinkering with the bunker's systems, the air filtration, the backup generator, the door hydraulics, muttering about needing everything tip-top. But his eyes darted constantly towards Morrow. He knew something or suspected something, but was too terrified to say it. The sabotage escalated, becoming bolder, yet always retaining a thin veil of plausibility. The backup generator sputtered and died one night, plunging us into absolute darkness for a terrifying 10 minutes before Ben, his hands shaking violently, managed to bypass a faulty relay. During the blackout, something heavy slammed against the bunker door, leaving a deep dent. Coincidence, or coordinated attack during a manufactured vulnerability? A crate of vital medical supplies was found ruined, vials smashed, bandages soaked in what looked like contaminated water. Must have been damaged in the initial blast, Morrow suggested mildly, examining a broken syringe with academic interest. But the crate had been stored in the most protected part of the bunker. The air filtration system started circulating dust laced with a faint, sweet, sickly smell, the same organic rot that clung to the air near the crater. Ben frantically changed the filters, finding them clogged with a strange, fibrous gray mold he'd never seen before. Growing inside the vents, he stammered, showing me the corrupted filter material. Like it was planted there. I tried pressing Ben when we were alone, during a brief moment when Rostova was grilling Morrow about his research notes and Maya was trying to inventory the dwindling food supplies. Ben, you know this isn't random, I said, keeping my voice low. These malfunctions. Morrow's too calm. What do you know? He flinched, wouldn't meet my eyes. Don't know nothing, Jax, he mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. Just, things break under stress, this place. It's under a lot of stress. He scrubbed frantically at a grease stain on the generator casing. Morrow, he asked me about the backup systems, detailed schematics, said it was for contingency planning. That's all. Contingency planning, I scoffed, or sabotage planning. Ben shook his head violently, backing away. Leave me alone, Jax. I'm just trying to keep us alive. But his fear was palpable, and it wasn't just directed at the things outside. The breaking point came during what Rostova grimly called resource reconnaissance. Our water filtration unit was failing, another convenient malfunction, and the stored water wouldn't last more than a few days. The only reliable source was the deep well pump near the old ranger station, about 200 yards from the lodge. It was exposed territory, but essential. Minimal risk profile if we move fast, Rostova declared, checking her weapon. Tell her your point. Carter, you know the pump system. You come to operate it. Flores, you stay with Morrow, maintain bunker security. No, Maya said, her voice surprisingly firm. She looked directly at Morrow, a spark of defiance in her eyes. I'm going with you. Ben shouldn't be out there alone. She glanced meaningfully at me. She didn't trust Morrow alone with Ben either. Or maybe she didn't trust Morrow alone, period. Morrow merely shrugged. As you wish, prudent perhaps. Monitor biological contaminants near the wellhead, Maya. Useful data. Rostova hesitated, then nodded curtly. Fine, stick close. We move in 2 minutes. The short journey to the ranger station was thick with tension. The air felt heavy, charged. The choir was silent today, which was somehow more unnerving than their chatter. We reached the small, sturdy brick building of the ranger station without incident. The wellhead was behind it, enclosed by a low chain-link fence, flimsy compared to the main perimeter, but intact. Ben approached the pump controls, his hands visibly shaking. Okay, okay. Main breaker. Auxiliary pump engage. He flipped switches, his breath catching in his throat. The pump whirred, coughed, then settled into a steady, churning rhythm. Clean water began gushing from the spigot into the large containers we'd brought. Good work, Ben, I said, scanning the tree line, rifle ready. Rostova took up a position covering the opposite side. Maya stood near Ben, watching the woods with wide, fearful eyes. That's when it happened. A low growl echoed from the ranger station itself, from inside. Ristova and I exchanged a look of disbelief. How? The doors were locked, windows barred. The growling intensified, joined by scratching sounds, frantic and powerful. Then, with a screech of tortured metal, the station's heavy wooden door bulged outwards, splinters flying. "Ben Maya back," I shouted, shoving them away from the pump. The door burst open. Standing framed in the doorway wasn't Pack Alpha, but something arguably worse in its sheer wrongness. It was, or had been, a black bear. One of the sanctuary's residents, probably Sarge, an old boar missing half an ear. But the meteorite's influence had warped him hideously. His fur was matted with the same gray fungus infecting Miller. One foreleg was twisted at an impossible angle, ending not in claws but in jagged shards of what looked like fused rock, glowing faintly with internal heat. His jaw hung slack, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth far too numerous for any bear, dripping viscous black saliva. His eyes were milky white, unseeing, but he sniffed the air, head swinging back and forth, zeroing in on us. "Sacred Mother," Ben breathed, stumbling backwards. The mutated bear lumbered forward, surprisingly fast despite its ruined leg. It ignored us, heading straight for the humming well pump. "It's going for the water," Maya cried out, "to contaminate it." "Or disable it," Ristova grunted, firing her pistol. The bullets hit the bear's thick, fungoid hide with wet thuds seeming to cause little pain. It snarled, a wet, gurgling sound, and swiped blindly with its rock-shard limb. The blow missed Ristova but struck the pump control box, shearing metal, sending sparks flying. The pump died instantly. "No," Ben yelled, watching our water source go dead. Morrow's voice crackled over the radio clipped to my vest, not the short-range one, but a different frequency Ben must have left active on a spare unit. "Fascinating defensive adaptation, mineral integration into bone structure. Observe the lack of traditional pain response." I ignored him, firing my rifle at the bear's head. One shot seemed to penetrate deeper, near the temple. The creature staggered, roaring, a sound thick with agony and something else. Confusion. It swiped again, catching Maya a glancing blow, sending her sprawling. "Maya," I yelled, rushing towards her as Ristova laid down covering fire. The bear turned its attention towards me, its milky eyes somehow fixing on my movement. It charged, jaws gaping. I fired again, point blank, aiming for the throat. It stumbled back, black ichor spraying. Then from the woods came the howl. Pack Alpha close. And with the howl, the bear seemed to deflate. It shuddered violently, the fungal patches on its body pulsing with a faint light. It collapsed, twitching, the rock-shard limb crumbling into dust. It lay still, the only sound the gurgling of its labored breathing, which quickly faded into silence. Dead or deactivated. What the hell was that? Rostova panted, lowering her weapon slightly, scanning the trees. It's like it was turned off. Commanded, I said grimly, helping Maya to her feet. She was shaken, bruised, but okay. Pack Alpha called it off, or recalled it. I looked back towards the lodge. And how did it get inside the locked ranger station? Ben, pale and trembling, pointed towards the back of the station. A heavy metal security grate covering a ventilation shaft was bent outwards, mangled. That grate, it was loose last week. I was meant to reinforce it. Morrow. He told me it wasn't a priority, said to focus on the bunker systems. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Morrow hadn't just been creating vulnerabilities. He'd been setting traps, using his knowledge of the sanctuary's weaknesses, perhaps even guiding the creatures, telling them where to strike, when to cause maximum damage, maximum fear. He'd likely let the bear into the station himself earlier, knowing we'd eventually need water. He knew, I said, my voice low and hard. Morrow knew that thing was in there. He sent us out here to be attacked, to disable the pump. Rostova's face was granite. Commander to bunker, she said into her radio, switching to the shared frequency. Morrow, status report. A pause, then Morrow's calm voice. All secure here, Commander. Maya, did you manage to collect any samples from the Ursine entity? Its biological resilience was. Can it, Morrow? Rostova snapped. We know. Silence on the radio, a heavy, knowing silence. We have to go back, Maya whispered, clutching her bruised arm. We can't leave him. What if he tries something else? He just did, I said grimly, looking at the destroyed pump, the dead bear, the mangled vent grate. And he's probably already planning his next move. We retreated back to the lodge, the silence heavier than ever. We found Morrow exactly where we left him, sitting calmly at the table, his notebook open. He looked up as we entered, his expression unreadable. Problems with the pump? He asked mildly. You bastard, Ben whimpered, shrinking away from him. I raised my rifle, centering the sight on Morrow's chest. It's over, Morrow. We know what you've been doing. Sabotaging systems, guiding the attacks, talking to them. Morrow didn't flinch. He slowly closed his notebook. Knowing and understanding are two different things, Jax, he said, his voice dangerously soft. You see sabotage, I see. Communication, facilitation, these creatures, this intelligence emerging from the impact. It's not just rampaging, it's learning, adapting. It needed to test your responses, understand your limitations. It needed me to translate. Translate, Rostova scoffed, her pistol aimed steadily at him. You're helping them kill us. A faint smile touched Morrow's lips. Kill, perhaps, or perhaps. Integrate. Humanity has had its time dominating this planet, Commander. We've become a disease, the meteorite. It didn't bring destruction, it brought a cure. A new paradigm, faster, stronger, more adaptable, connected to the planet in a way we've forgotten. He gestured vaguely towards the viewport. They aren't monsters, they are the next step. You're insane, Maya breathed, horrified. Am I? Morrow tilted his head. Or am I the only one who sees the beautiful, terrible truth? The only one willing to midwife the new age? His eyes flickered towards the viewport, then back to us. There was no fear in them, only conviction and something else, anticipation. It doesn't matter what you think you know, he said softly. Pack Alpha understands, and he's ready for the next phase. He wants to see the source. He wants the heart. Before I could ask what he meant, a sound ripped through the air, not a howl, not a screech, but a deep, resonant thrumming. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the steel walls of the bunker, through the concrete floor, up through the soles of my boots. It was the sound of the mountain itself waking up. And from the direction of the crater, a faint, sickly green light began to pulse, painting the undersides of the low clouds. Morrow smiled. He's calling us. Chapter 4: The Heart of the Crater. The thrumming intensified, a nauseating subsonic pulse that resonated in our chests and skulls. The sickly green light pulsing from the crater rim grew stronger, casting long, dancing shadows through the bunker's viewport. Outside, the mutated wildlife reacted. Howls rose, deeper and more resonant than before, accompanied by the frantic clicking of the choir, now less like mimicry and more like a ritualistic chant. It felt like the entire sanctuary was being drawn towards the impact site, summoned by Morrow's heart. "What is that?" Maya asked, her voice trembling, covering her ears as if to block out the thrumming. "What's happening?" "The next phase," Morrow repeated, his eyes fixed on the pulsing green light, a light with fanatical fervor. "The integration. Pack Alpha understands the energy source. He wants to connect." "Connect," Rostova spat, her pistol unwavering. "You mean feed, absorb whatever the hell that thing is." "Perhaps," Morrow conceded with a shrug. "Energy transference is fundamental to evolution. Why should this be different? He recognizes its power. He's drawn to it. And," he added, his gaze flicking towards Ben, "he requires clear passage." Ben whimpered, backing further away until he hit the bunker wall. "No, I didn't. He made me." "Made you what, Ben?" I demanded, keeping my rifle trained on Morrow. The access tunnel," Ben stammered, tears streaming down his face. "From the old mine workings beneath the sanctuary. It runs near the crater. Morrow," he said, Pack Alpha needed it. He knew the seismic sensors showed instability there after the impact. He made me disable the remote blast charges meant to seal it in emergencies. Said it was drawing too much power from the generator. A cold dread washed over me. An escape route or an invasion route. You gave them a way in, or a way to the crater bypassing the worst of the terrain. Morrow smiled thinly. "Survival requires adaptation, Jax, and sometimes adaptation requires assistance." Rostova swore violently. "We seal that tunnel. Now, Carter, the manual detonators." Ben shook his head frantically. "Gone. Morrow took them yesterday. Said he needed spare wiring." Morrow chuckled softly. "Redundancies are inefficient." The thrumming outside reached a new peak, shaking the very foundations of the bunker. Dust sifted from the ceiling. A high-pitched whine started, seemingly coming from the metal walls themselves. "He's getting impatient," Morrow observed calmly. Suddenly, the main bunker door, the one I'd slammed shut against the choir days ago, buckled inwards with a deafening shriek of tortured steel. It was Pack Alpha's brute force this time. Something was prying it open, metal groaning and tearing as unseen leverage was applied from outside. "They're coming," Maya screamed. "Fall back," Rostova yelled, firing 2 shots at Morrow. He jerked, crying out as bullets slammed into his shoulder and leg, but he didn't go down. He staggered back against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder, a look of pained fury on his face. "You fools," he snarled. "You can't stop this." I didn't wait to argue. I grabbed Maya's arm. "Ben, move." We scrambled towards the bunker's secondary emergency exit, a smaller hatch leading to a narrow maintenance corridor that connected to the lodge's basement. Rostova provided covering fire towards the groaning main door, now visibly bending inwards, revealing glimpses of yellow, luminous eyes and dark fur pressing against the widening gap. We tumbled through the hatch, Rostova following and slamming it shut behind us just as the main door finally gave way with a horrendous crash. Heavy, clawed footsteps echoed from the bunker room we just vacated. The maintenance corridor was narrow, damp, and lit only by my wavering maglite beam. We ran, stumbling over pipes and discarded equipment. Behind us, we heard snarling and a furious roar of pain, Morrow, presumably, meeting his creations face to fang. Then the sounds of pursuit. Heavy paws pounding on concrete, echoing in the confined space. "This way," Ben gasped, veering left into the lodge basement proper. It was a maze of storage shelves, furnace equipment, and old furniture covered in white sheets like forgotten ghosts. "The tunnel access. It's through the old cold storage room." We plunged deeper into the darkness, the sounds of the hunt close behind. We could hear them now, multiple wolves, their panting breath loud, their claws scraping on the floor. The thrumming from the crater seemed to pulse through the very ground beneath our feet. Ben fumbled with a heavy, insulated door, finally wrenching it open. "In here." The cold storage room was surprisingly large, smelling faintly of mildew and decay. At the far end, partially hidden behind rusted shelving units, was a dark opening framed with rough-hewn timbers, the entrance to the old mine tunnel. And standing before it, as if waiting, was Pack Alpha. He filled the space, his luminous eyes fixing on us, the strange intelligence burning within them. He wasn't snarling or aggressive now. He watched us with that same cold assessment, head cocked slightly as if curious. Behind him the tunnel stretched into blackness, and from its depth the green pulsing light was visible, casting eerie shadows. The thrumming was stronger here, almost painful. And beside Pack Alpha stood Morrow. He was leaning heavily against the tunnel entrance, his clothes torn and blood-stained, but alive. He held a strange object in his good hand, something crystalline, jagged, glowing faintly with the same green light as the crater, a fragment of the meteorite itself. "He let you live," Rostova breathed, raising her pistol. Morrow laughed, a ragged, painful sound. "Live, Commander, I am being reborn." He gestured with the glowing shard. "Pack Alpha understands the heart. It doesn't just provide energy, it communicates, it integrates. He brought me here, showed me." He held the shard towards Pack Alpha, who sniffed it cautiously, then let out a low, almost reverent whine. "He wants the source," Morrow continued, his voice gaining strength, taking on a hypnotic quality. "He wants to merge with it, become more, and he requires witnesses, or perhaps participants." The green light from the tunnel intensified, pulsing in time with the thrumming. I felt a strange pull towards it, a dizzying disorientation. My thoughts felt fuzzy, like static encroaching on a clear signal. "Resist it," Rostova barked, shaking her head as if to clear it. "It's affecting our minds." Pack Alpha took a step towards us, not threateningly but invitingly. Morrow held out the glowing shard. "Join us, Jax, Maya. Embrace the change. Become part of the new consciousness." Maya whimpered, pressing back against me. Ben was frozen, staring at the pulsing light with wide, vacant eyes. "Never," I growled, raising my rifle. But before I could fire, Maya stepped forward. "Maya, no," I yelled. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on Pack Alpha, but not with fear, with sadness, deep, profound sadness. "Kazan," she whispered, using the name of the original alpha wolf we'd reintroduced, the one whose pack had likely formed the core of these mutated horrors. "Is that you, underneath all this pain?" Pack Alpha tilted his head, a flicker of something, confusion, recognition, crossing his intelligent eyes. The constant thrumming seemed to momentarily falter. Morrow snarled, "Irrelevant, sentimental attachments are weaknesses." He thrust the glowing shard towards the wolf. "Take it, connect, fulfill the—" He was cut off by a choked cry. Ben Carter, galvanized by a sudden, desperate surge of courage or terror, lunged forward. Not at Morrow, not at the wolf. He scrambled past them towards the pulsing green light in the tunnel. "Make it stop," he screamed. "Just make it stop." He ran headlong into the tunnel towards the source of the thrumming. As he crossed an invisible threshold maybe 20 feet in, the green light flared blindingly. Ben screamed, a sound of pure agony that was cut off instantly. His silhouette, illuminated against the green glare, seemed to dissolve, twist apart like smoke in a hurricane. Then he was gone. The light dimmed slightly, the thrumming returning to its previous intensity. We stared in horror. Morrow looked momentarily surprised, then annoyed. "A pointless sacrifice. The energy requires a compatible vessel." Pack Alpha, however, seemed disturbed. He whined, backing away from the tunnel entrance, shaking his massive head. The flicker of recognition in his eyes when Maya spoke his old name, Ben's horrifying dissolution. Perhaps some echo of his former self, his wolf nature, recoiled from the alien wrongness of the heart. "He's hesitating," Maya whispered, hope dawning in her voice. "Kazan, listen, this isn't you." "Silence!" Morrow shrieked, enraged. He turned his fury on Maya, raising the glowing shard like a weapon. "Insolent whelp, the great integration demands." Rostova fired, 2 shots center mass. Morrow staggered back, the shard flying from his hand. It hit the stone floor and shattered, the green light within extinguishing instantly. Morrow collapsed, clutching his chest, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He stared at Pack Alpha, then at the empty tunnel entrance where Ben had vanished. "No, incomplete," he gasped, then lay still. With Morrow dead and the shard destroyed, the intense thrumming lessened, the oppressive mental static clearing slightly. Pack Alpha looked down at Morrow's body, then back at us, then towards the now less menacing glow from the tunnel. He let out a long, low howl, but this time it sounded different. Less like a general's command, more like mourning, conflicted. Then he turned, not towards us, but back towards the darkness of the basement, nudging his remaining followers, two of the giant wolves who had followed us, back the way they came. He gave us one last, long look, his luminous eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't decipher, before melting into the shadows and disappearing. We were left in the echoing silence of the cold storage room, the faint green pulse from the tunnel the only light, the smell of ozone and Morrow's blood thick in the air. Ben was gone, disintegrated. Morrow was dead. Pack Alpha and his wolves had retreated. "Is it over?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rostova cautiously approached the tunnel entrance, peering into the green-tinged darkness. The thrumming was still there, but subdued like a sleeping beast. "The energy source is still active," and Morrow said, "Compatible vessel." "What does that mean?" I didn't know. But as I looked at the spot where Ben Carter had ceased to exist, and remembered the cold intelligence in Pack Alpha's eyes, I had a sinking feeling. It wasn't over. The heart was still beating in the depths of the mountain, and something, eventually, would find its way back to it. Or worse, something might learn to use its power from afar. We had survived the confrontation, but the horror felt like it had just sunk its roots deeper into the mountain, waiting. Chapter 5: Echoes in the Ash. The retreat of Pack Alpha felt less like a victory and more like a cessation of hostilities, a pause in a war we hadn't fully understood. Leaving Morrow's body where it lay in the cold storage room, a testament to his fatal hubris, we didn't dare try to retrieve Ben's remains. There were none. The tunnel pulsed with its sickly green light, a silent, ominous reminder of the alien power still lurking beneath us. The thrumming had subsided to a barely perceptible vibration in the rock, but the air still felt wrong, charged with static and the faint, metallic tang of ozone. Rostova, ever the pragmatist, took charge. "We can't stay here. The structural integrity of this basement is compromised, and Pack Alpha could return. We need defensible high ground and a clear field of vision. The fire lookout tower on Hawk's Peak, assuming it's still standing." It was our best bet. Hawk's Peak was on the opposite side of the sanctuary from the impact crater, offering a panoramic view. More importantly, it was small, constructed mostly of steel, and harder for large creatures to assault directly. Gathering the last of our meager supplies, the remaining uncontaminated water, a handful of protein bars, the first aid kit, our weapons, and precious ammo, felt like preparing for a funeral. Hours. The journey out of the lodge basement and across the ravaged sanctuary grounds was surreal. The sun was rising, casting long, distorted shadows through the mutated trees. The world was painted in shades of gray ash and bruised purple dawn. There was movement in the periphery, smaller mutated creatures, things that skittered and crawled, keeping their distance now. A glider ripper watched us from a blasted pine, its eyes glowing faintly, but it didn't attack. It felt like the lower ranks were waiting for new orders now that their general was gone, or perhaps conflicted. The choir, however, was still active. As we crossed the open space near the ruined visitor center, their voices drifted down, carried on the chill morning wind. Not mimicking us this time. They were mimicking Morrow. Integration, rasped a voice like dry leaves. The heart calls, clicked another. Compatible vessel, echoed a third, followed by a series of wet, choking sounds that made my stomach turn. Were they just repeating his last thoughts? Or were they processing, learning, understanding the concepts? The idea of those birds contemplating Morrow's insane philosophy was almost worse than their direct mimicry. Maya flinched at every call, gripping my arm tightly. Rostova ignored them, her focus absolute on reaching the tower. We moved in silence, the only sounds our footsteps crunching on ash and debris, and the distant, mocking voices of the choir. The fire tower was intact, miraculously spared the worst of the blast. A skeletal steel structure rising 100 feet above the tree line, topped by a small glass and metal cabin. Climbing the steep, narrow stairs felt like ascending into the unknown. Would we find safety or another trap? The cabin was empty, dusty, but secure. The windows were thick plexiglass, cracked but holding. Rostova immediately began checking sightlines, rationing fields of fire. Maya found an old, dusty logbook and started writing, her hand shaking, observations, maybe, or just a way to process the trauma. I stood at the window facing the crater, watching the faint green glow still pulsing miles away. Days bled into a tense routine. Watch, eat sparingly, sleep in shifts, listen. The larger mutated animals, including Pack Alpha and his core group, were rarely seen. Sometimes, at dawn or dusk, we'd catch a glimpse of huge, shadowy forms moving through the distant trees near the crater's edge, drawn perhaps by the lingering energy, but they never approached the tower. It was the smaller things that worried us now. The toxin bloom vipers seen coiled in unnaturally vibrant patches of mutated vegetation. The giant weaver spiders spinning metallic webs that shimmered like deadly lace in the sunlight. The incessant, watchful presence of the choir. They were always there, perched on nearby trees, their two intelligent eyes following our movements in the cabin. They continued their fragmented recital of Morrow's ideology, sometimes mixing it with Ben Carter's panicked cries or the sounds of the bear attack. It was a constant psychological erosion. One afternoon, Maya pointed towards the crater. "Jax, look." A thin plume of smoke, or maybe dust, was rising from the center of the impact zone. Not the green glow, but something else, darker. Geothermal activity, Rostova speculated, peering through binoculars, or something else waking up. We couldn't know. We were trapped on our steel island, observers of a hostile world we no longer understood. The silence had returned, in a way, the silence of active avoidance. The major predators seemed occupied elsewhere, perhaps still conflicted or adapting to life without Morrow's direct influence, or perhaps drawn deeper into the mystery of the crater's heart. Escape seemed impossible. The perimeter fence was down, but the surrounding wilderness was now an alien landscape teeming with mutated life. And even if we could somehow hike out, what then? Were we carrying something? An infection? Spores? Could we doom the outside world just by surviving? Morrow's talk of integration of humanity as a disease. It echoed disturbingly. Rostova had tried the emergency radio in the tower, but it was as dead as everything else. We were utterly alone. The end, when it began, was quiet. It started with the birds. One morning the choir fell silent. Mid-chant they simply stopped. They remained perched, watchful, but the unnerving mimicry ceased. An hour later they took flight, not scattering, but forming a tight, dark vortex that circled the tower once, twice, then headed directly towards the crater, disappearing over the ridge. "What does that mean?" Maya whispered, unnerved by the sudden quiet. "Change of command," Rostova muttered, scanning the tree line below. "Or consolidation." The answer came that night. The green glow from the crater intensified dramatically, pulsing faster, brighter than ever before. The low thrumming returned, vibrating through the tower's steel frame. But this time it felt different, focused, directed. And then we saw him. Pac Alpha emerged from the trees near the base of our tower. He was alone. He looked up, his luminous eyes fixing on the cabin. He didn't growl, didn't display aggression. He simply sat down on his haunches, like a dog waiting for its master, and watched the crater. The pulsing green light flared, reached a crescendo, and then shot upwards. A beam of pure, sickly green energy lanced into the night sky, illuminating the entire sanctuary in its nauseating light. It held for a long moment, a beacon of alien power, before slowly fading back to the ambient glow. The thrumming stopped. The air felt strangely clean, the oppressive static gone. Pac Alpha stood up. He looked different. The faint luminescence in his eyes was gone. The subtle distortion of his skull seemed less pronounced. He shook his massive head, almost like a normal wolf clearing its senses. He looked up at our tower, not with cold intelligence or malice, but with what looked like simple canine curiosity, perhaps even confusion. Then he turned and trotted back into the woods, disappearing from view. What was that?" Maya asked, bewildered. "The energy surge," Rostova hypothesized, lowering her binoculars slowly. "Maybe it burned out or transferred." Transferred, the word hung in the air. Morrow's compatible vessel. Had something finally connected to the heart, or had the heart itself moved on? We didn't know. The green glow from the crater was gone, replaced by only the faint, residual smoke plume. The mutated animals seemed calmer, less coordinated, more like the frightened, altered creatures they were, rather than soldiers in an alien war. Some semblance of the natural order, albeit a twisted one, seemed to be reasserting itself. But the fear remained, colder and deeper than before. The immediate threat might have lessened, but the source, the alien intelligence or energy, wasn't necessarily gone. It had just relocated, ascended, gone somewhere else, taking the focused malice with it, or projecting it onto a new stage. We were still trapped. The sanctuary was still a mutated nightmare, but the feeling of being actively hunted by a calculating intelligence, guided by a human traitor, had lifted, replaced now by a profound sense of cosmic dread. We had survived the localized outbreak, the siege, but we were left behind in the ashes with the chilling knowledge that something vast, alien, and transformative had touched our world, used us, and moved on. We didn't know if rescue would ever come. We didn't know if the mutations were contained or if spores were drifting on the wind beyond the mountain ridges. We didn't know what happened to the consciousness, the intelligence that had resided in the heart of the crater. All we knew was the silence that settled back over Mount Chiron, not the heavy, unnatural silence of the first days, but an empty silence, the silence of aftermath, the silence of being forgotten. And as I looked out over the warped landscape under the uncaring stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of our chapter. The horror hadn't ended. It had just gone airborne. The end.